its structure, and why Chinese characters has vertical and horizontal writing style, and how written Chinese has survived nowadays, and the future of written Chinese language, and the last part, tools to Chinese calligraphy. Okay, so now let's come to the first part. What's Chinese character? Firstly, I'd like to share you guys a video, and you may have a rough idea about what's the Chinese character. Okay. Okay, wait a moment. Okay. Guys, can you see the screen?
Yes, Roshi.
Okay, great.
Let's talk about Chinese characters. They look tough and scary with all their random lines, swoops, and slashes, but they're not actually as difficult as you think. They're just very different from the phonetic alphabets that Westerners are used to. With alphabets, the letters act like building blocks that combine to form words. When you see the letter T, you know it represents the sound. When you see the letters T-R-E-E, you recognize all of those sound symbols and you can put them together to form the sound tree. If you want to write the word tree, you think about how to say the word, pay attention to the sounds that you make, and then write down those letters. That's how a phonetic writing system works. Chinese is much different though. It's a pictographic writing system, not a phonetic writing system. Being a pictographic writing system means that Chinese characters are pictures, like Egyptian hieroglyphs. If you want to write the word tree, you don't have to bother with writing letters to sound out the word. You simply draw a picture of a tree. It's that simple. That's how a pictographic writing system works. The Chinese writing system is based on drawings of the things they saw in the world around them. When you look at a Chinese character, you are looking at a stylized drawing that depicts an object or an idea. If a Chinese character is a picture of an object, like a tree, it's called a pictograph. If a Chinese character is a picture of an abstract idea, like 3 or happy, it's called an ideograph, which means idea picture. In layman terms, though, you can simply refer to the Chinese script as Chinese characters. You are actually quite familiar with pictographs and idiographs. You see these types of symbols on a daily basis all around the world in the form of street signs and warning labels, like recycle, radioactive, wet floor, no swimming, no smoking, etc. These are examples of pictographic symbols, and they are universally understood because the human mind is excellent at pattern matching. When an eye sees a pattern, the brain has an innate drive to decipher the pattern as something it recognizes. It's easy enough to draw pictographs for simple objects such as a tree, fire, or a multi-floored tower to express the idea tall. However, attempting to draw abstract ideas like have or may, as in may I, is a little more complicated. Consider for a moment what you would draw to capture the essence of have, possess. Perhaps you could draw a hand with something in it. That's exactly what the Chinese ideograph portrays. It's a simple 2-part picture that depicts a hand with an object in it. How about graphically illustrating the idea may? What could be drawn to represent this complex idea? The actual Chinese ideograph for this is composed of 2 simpler pictographic parts, obstacle and opening. By these 2 simpler pictures, combining together, they paint a picture that can be interpreted as a way through an obstacle, which is a very interesting way to think of getting permission. Most Chinese characters work like the 2 examples above. Multiple simple pictographs are combined to convey increasingly complex objects and ideas. This approach makes sense because there is a seemingly endless list of objects, ideas, situations, actions, and descriptive words used in communication. It would be very difficult for every word to have its own completely unique symbol. Just for fun, let's look at a few more examples of how Chinese characters depict nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, and conjunctions. Autumn is the season when grain stalks in the fields are burned. The verb see depicts a hand shading an eye as it gazes into the distance. Shells were used as currency in ancient times. To make some purchases, an entire basket of shells was needed. So this is how the Chinese character for expensive is drawn. To express not, the Chinese character shows a hand reaching into swirling water, searching for a lost object. The character for to shows a bird swooping down towards the ground, arriving to its destination. The conjunction must reminds us of an ancient decree imposed on all men that required them to maintain long beards and hair on their heads. All of these simple pictographic components fit together like puzzle pieces to create a balanced, visually pleasing Chinese character of uniform size. Some of these component parts are thin and tall, others are short and wide, and some bend. Depending on how many of these are combined, along with the shape of each component part, the following layouts are possible. 2 or 3 component parts might be stacked vertically, lined up next to each other horizontally. One component could encompass or partially encompass another, or any combination of these 3. There are also rare instances where 2 components will merge together, one is laid on top of the other. Additionally, some of these simple pictographic components, but not all, are able to stand alone without combining with other components. For example, the component heart is often combined with other components to help relay abstract meanings. However, it also stands alone for the actual Chinese ideograph, heart. The pronunciation of the components is worth learning, for they sometimes provide clues to the pronunciation of the character in which they occur. This means that even if it's your first time to see a new Chinese character, you can probably guess what it means and also guess how to say the character if you recognize all of the smaller parts that are in the character. All of the components within a character contribute to its meaning, and about half of the time, one of the components will carry the pronunciation of the entire character. However, this doesn't occur consistently. Language existed far before the written language. When creating Chinese characters, drawing them to relay the meaning of the character took precedence over relaying their pronunciation. However, as the Chinese script has evolved through the centuries, scholars have occasionally added additional components to the original version of some characters in an attempt to clarify the character's meaning or pronunciation. It should also be noted that due to the evolution of the spoken Chinese language, sometimes the character is no longer pronounced the way it once was, and thus the phonetic clue, if present at all, may not be completely accurate. The red component provides the character's pronunciation. All right, you get the idea of how Chinese characters work. Now let's talk about numbers. People often ask how many Chinese characters there are. Different sources give different numbers. One of the most famous dictionaries in China, the Kangxi Dictionary, contains over 47,000 characters. The Taiwan Ministry of Education has been working to standardize traditional Chinese characters since the 1980s, and to date they have published a total of 48,172 characters. The recently published Hanyu Daci Dian lists over 60,000 characters. If we look at computer encoding, due to the necessity to type Chinese characters, we find that Unicode 5.0 has approximately 70,000 Chinese characters in its tables. And lastly, the 5th official version of the Dictionary of Chinese Character Variants contains 106,230 characters. The good news is you don't really need to learn all of them. The Taiwan Ministry of Education has published a list of 4,808 most frequently used traditional Chinese characters, followed by an additional 6,341 second most frequently used traditional characters. In Hong Kong, the Education of Manpower Bureau established a list of 4,759 most frequently used traditional characters. And in mainland China, the chart of common simplified characters only contains 3,500 in its list. The point is, these characters cover 99% of a 2 million word sample, which means that to be considered literate, one only needs to recognize 3,500 simplified characters or 4,800 traditional characters. Phew. So there you have it. Just by having watched this presentation, you are already way ahead of the race because you understand that Chinese characters are much more than just a sequence of lines to be memorized. A Chinese character is a picture created by combining several simpler pictographic components. These simpler pictographic components are the building blocks of Chinese characters, just like alphabets are the building blocks of phonetic languages. We hope you enjoyed this pictographic video presentation.
Okay, so from this video clip, you can see in general idea about what's the Chinese character, right? Okay, let's continue, and I will introduce them to you one by one. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So firstly, Chinese character has a history of more than 5,000 years, and as an old and complicated form of writing, it's still used about 1/5 of the world population. And the Chinese character, as the video said, is pictographic and ideographic. And the invention of Chinese characters draw pictures to express words and ideas. And some simple pictures were compiled to make more complete thought. There has no exact statistics on the total numbers of Chinese character, and only about figures some approximate figures can be found in dictionaries, and it's about 85,000 Chinese characters have been included in Chinese treasures published in the 20th century. Okay, and in 2013, Chinese calligraphy was added to UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List. Okay, this is some general information about Chinese culture. And okay, and now let's come to the origin. Okay, where Chinese character comes from still remains a mystery based on the ancient Chinese documents and some archaeology discovery. There are at least 3 theories about the origin of the Chinese characters. The first one is 仓颉造字说, the Cangjie's invention of Chinese character. Cangjie is a legendary figure, and he is said to be the history hero of the Yan Imperial and the inventor of the earliest of Chinese character. And legend described him as a great hero with 4 eyes and 2 pupils in each eyes, like this one. And he was a good observer and was inspired by the climate, the shape of the objects, the marks and the footprints of the birds and other animals to record objects. So his invention of the Chinese character made millet rain from heaven, and deity and ghosts cry, as recorded in Huainan by Liu An of the Western Han Dynasty. And the Shanxi province is said to be Cangjie's hometown. So people in Shanxi build the special temples and hold big memorial ceremonies every year to worship him. Okay. And the second origin is the 8 chilograms. And the 8 chilogram, which is said to be invited by the immortal Fuxi, which is also who is also considered as one of the versions considering the religion. The origin of the Chinese character, Fuxi. Okay. And the third origin is from pictures. Modern scholar believed that Chinese character, which began as simple drawing of the natural objects, originated from pictures such as 日、人、女、口、木、山、马、飞. They are pictographic and considered to be the earliest form of Chinese written symbols. And the Chinese character were initially meant to be simple pictures to help people to remember things. You can see this picture. This is the characters in ancient times, but you can see it looks very like a picture. And after a long period of development, it finally became a unique characters system that embody phonetic sounds, image idea, and rhyme at the same time. And also from this picture, you can clearly know the Chinese character in old time is quite like pictures. Okay. After we know three origin of the Chinese character, we will go to the evolution of the Chinese character. What's the development of the Chinese character? Here, I'd like to share you some information about Chinese calligraphy and the relationship between the Chinese character and the Chinese calligraphy. So firstly, what's Chinese calligraphy? Calligraphy native to Chinese is a traditional art with a long history and a national characteristic feature, and it's a happy result of the painstaking and the creative efforts of generation upon generation of artists, and it has many styles, ranging from the seal character, official script, regular script, running script to cursive script, etc. And the style changed with the passage of the time and the shifting from the charm, artistic conception, image to delight. And its function also vary from time to time, from self-enjoyment to self-cultivation. And the calligraphy is known for its beautiful shape, rich emotion, and artistic conception. And it's often likened to a picture, a piece of music, and a poem. And its flowing stroke not only reminding us of beauty of nature, but also express the beauty of the human spirit. And it's not only a splendid flower in the garden of the Chinese culture, but also a shining pearl in the treasure house of art of human beings. And as for the relationship between the two, the art of calligraphy is a direct result of the Chinese characters. And with the elapse of time, 6 major scripts, namely oracle, bones inscription, bronze inscription, seal script, official script, regular script, cursive script, has evolved from Chinese character in the course of their development. And each script has resulted in different styles and schools of calligraphers. And the different schools of calligraphy produce different artistic sorts, various and have many various ways of writing. Okay. And okay, with the background information here, I'd like to show you a video to let you have a more idea about how Chinese character evolved and how Chinese calligraphy development. Okay. Okay, wait a moment. Sorry, wait. Oh. Okay. See this. So guys, can you see the screen? Guys?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Laoshi.
Okay,
Laoshi.
great. Okay.
Play the video, Laoshi.
Yes, Laoshi.
Glyphs may not seem familiar to you. Horse, car, fish, eye, mountain. These glyphs may not seem familiar to you, but you've certainly met their descendants. We've all seen Chinese characters before, whether on the menu of your local Chinese restaurant or on the back of a gym enthusiast that had a spiritual awakening during their last backpacking trip in Asia. We can understand the appeal these logograms have. Chinese writings are beautifully designed and have an air of wisdom to them. But there's more to Chinese characters than aesthetics. They're a reflection of 3,000 years of cultural evolution. But when did these symbols become part of the Chinese language? And how have they evolved over the years? You're watching Explore Mode, and today we're diving into the history of Chinese characters. To the unknowing eye, Chinese characters may seem like a confusing collection of lines and boxes, but they're not just random strokes. Each character carries deep meaning. You just need to know how to interpret them. Think about Chinese characters like Lego blocks. Chinese words are built part by part. Usually, one part represents the meaning, the radical, and the other pronunciation. There are a lot of basic characters that can stand alone, like water, shui, heart, xin, and mouth, kou. Others are built from left to right, like the word for good, hao, which depicts a mother with her child, symbolizing goodness or happiness. Some are built from top to bottom, like the word for grass, cao, which has the radical for grass at the top and the word for early, zao, at the bottom, which gives it its pronunciation. And others are written from the outside in, like the word for stuffy, mun, which shows a heart within a door, symbolizing a person feeling muggy and trapped behind closed doors. The oldest form of Chinese writing dates back to 1200 BCE, in the late years of the Shang dynasty. These early inscriptions are called oracle bone scripts, 甲骨文. As you might have guessed from the name, oracle bone scripts, known in Chinese as 甲骨文, were used for divination purposes. Inquirers would engrave their questions on an ox scapula or tortoise shells, which were then handed to a diviner. The diviner would heat up the bone until it cracked and interpret an answer depending on where the fissures grew. Questions at the time covered a wide range of topics, from military campaign strategies to hunting expeditions and dream interpretations. These early Chinese pictograms can still be linked to modern Chinese characters. Take this oracle bone question about the weather as an example. The characters can still be easily translated and understood in modern Chinese. The similarities are even more apparent in highly pictographic characters like water, shui, fire, huo, person, ren, and tree or wood, mu. See what we're talking about? Oracle bones almost got crushed to extinction. During the 19th century, farmers dug out a number of oracle bone scripts and confused them with fossils from the Pleistocene that, at the time, were crushed and sold as Chinese medicine to treat malaria and knife wounds. The story goes that in 1899, some oracle bones were sold to Wang Yirou, the chancellor of the Imperial Academy in Beijing, who happened to be a collector of Chinese bronzes, which also bear ancient Chinese scriptures. Upon further inspection of the bones that had been sold to him, he recognized these too had ancient Chinese writings on them. After his death in the year 1900, his collection of oracle bones was passed on to his son, who sold it to a Chinese archaeologist named Liu Yi. Liu would go on to publish rubbings of several oracle bone scripts, bringing the ancient scripture to the attention of international scholars. The rest is history. Chinese scripts found on oracle bones and bronze scripts were already quite advanced and functional for their time, but the characters were often inconsistent. Spanning through the late Zhou dynasty to Qin dynasty, roughly from 221 to 106 BCE, the seal script Chinese form, or 篆书, was developed. It was much more uniform in size and style, while still maintaining a pictographic essence, following elongated strokes and square shapes. These characters were typically carved onto stone or jade to create imperial seals. The first imperial seal was carved onto white jade and was commissioned by the first emperor of a unified China, Qin Shi Huangdi, after he defeated the other warring states. The Qin dynasty lasted just 36 years, but it is one of the most culturally influential dynasties in Chinese history. One of Qin Shi Huang's greatest projects was the construction of the Great Wall of China. Before his reign, there were pieces of wall by past emperors in different regions, but it was Qin who connected large stretches of them. Other dynasties after his would follow suit, creating the large fortification system we know of today. Another of Qin's historical legacies is his tomb. In 1974, unsuspecting farmers were digging a well in Shanxi, China, when they unearthed the clay head of what seemed to be an ancient Chinese warrior. Now we know them as the Terracotta Army Warriors, a collection of 8,000 soldiers built specifically to guard Qin's tomb and protect him in his afterlife. But it wasn't just soldiers. Qin's mausoleum contains cavalry horses, acrobats, chariots, and musicians, each of which was unique in their design. These sculptures helped historians and archaeologists study the craftsmanship of this time, as well as military rankings and even the chemical components of the paint used to decorate the sculptures. Seal script was very beautiful, and it served its ornamental purpose well, but it wasn't very convenient when it came to producing official documents quickly. This is where the first modern version of Chinese characters began to develop, beginning with clerical script. Clerical script, or Li Shu, appeared around 206 BCE to 220 AD. It was a much more simplified version of the seal script, replacing curves and circles with straight lines and squares. Clerical script would later evolve into the regular Chinese script we know today, without much changes other than the simplification of strokes. But the evolution of Chinese characters didn't stop there. Time for an Express Explorer explanation. Start the clock. Nowadays, there are two versions of modern Chinese characters: traditional characters used in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau, and simplified characters used in mainland China, Singapore, and Malaysia. The simplification of Chinese characters began in 1956, when, in an effort to raise literacy rates in the country, which was at 20% when the Communist Party took over, Chinese officials began releasing and promoting documents containing simplified versions of Chinese characters. Characters were simplified by decreasing the number of strokes per character. Sometimes this meant removing parts of the character, other times it meant rewriting it into a simpler form. But the simplified versus traditional debate goes beyond education. Many traditional Chinese supporters feel that much of the meaning and artistry behind each character was stripped away during the simplification process. Take the word love, or I, as an example. At the center of the character in traditional Chinese is the character for heart. In the simplified version, the heart is taken away. A more drastic change can be seen in the Chinese word for listen, ting. The traditional version has the character for ear, heart, eyes, and a line separating the heart and eyes to symbolize undivided attention, meaning that to truly listen, one's heart, eyes, and ears have to give undivided attention to whom or what we're listening to. Now, look at the simplified version, which was completely modified from the original. The character on the left is mouth, kou, and the character on the right is jin, a unit of measurement for weight. No connection can be made between the pictogram and the actual meaning of the word. But Chinese officials weren't just looking to simplify characters. They wanted to create a romanized version of their pronunciations that would help globalize the language. So Mao Zedong tasked Zhou Youguang, an economist turned linguist, with this mission, an offer he could not refuse, literally. Chinese characters were almost completely eliminated by Mao Zedong in mainland China, until an unlikely historical figure advised him against it. Before Mao rolled out the complete reformation of traditional characters, he was contemplating completely romanizing the Chinese language, that is, according to Zhou, until he met with Joseph Stalin in 1949. Mao shared his Chinese writing reform plans with him and asked Stalin for his advice. According to a memoir by Mao's personal secretary, Stalin told Mao, quote, "You're a great country, and you should have your own Chinese You shouldn't simply use the Latin alphabet. It took Zhou and a team of linguists 3 years to develop the pronunciation guide we now know as Hanyu Pinyin, based on the Zhuyin Puhao, the original Chinese phonetic guide. Zhou's guide has now become the most widely used Chinese romanization system in China and around the world, successfully facilitating the dissemination of Mandarin Chinese. Nowadays, 1.117 billion people in the world speak Mandarin Chinese, and with China expanding as an economic powerhouse, there's no doubt that number will increase. Are you up for the challenge?
So from this video, you can see that there are at least 6 major stage, or we can see 6 major calligraphy of Chinese calligraphy, and also we have the traditional Chinese and the simplified Chinese, right? And here we will see, we will only tell you the most the 6 major stage development. Okay, so don't worry about how to write it. Just know there are several stages in the development. Okay.
Now, which language we are learning? Is that simplified one?
If you want to learn, you just learn the simplified Chinese is okay. Okay. So, so the okay. Wait a moment. Okay, here's the 6 stage and the 6 categories of the calligraphy. They are oracle bone inscription, bronze inscription, seal inscription, official inscription, regular script, cursive script, and I have mentioned that in the previous slides that Chinese calligraphy not only remind us of the beauty of nature, but also express the beauty of the human spirit and the mindsets of Chinese people. And for example, the seal in script, 福泽, 养德福泽, 养德福泽, okay, 养德泽福, sorry, 养德泽福, from the right to the left. Okay, and these characters means with great fortune, auspiciousness will always follow you. Okay, 养德泽福. Okay, this one. And for this one, the official script, 知足常乐, which means pursue a simple lifestyle with contentment will make you always happy, which encourage people cherish what you already have. Okay, and this one, the regular script, 和气致祥, which means harmony brings great fortune. Okay, and this one, the cursive script, 家和万事兴, which means harmony at home brings prosperity. Okay, so these examples clearly tells us the Chinese character, and the Chinese culture behind the Chinese culture behind the Chinese character and the Chinese calligraphy. Okay. Okay. Maybe we can take 10 minutes rest, and then we come back to quickly go through this 6 stages. Okay, 10 minutes rest. Okay.
OK，老师。
好的，待会儿见。